Welcome, everybody, to our May 28, 2024 County Board meeting. I am Board Chair Libby Garvey, in case nobody knows, with my colleagues, Vice Chair Takis Karantonis, members Matt DeFranti, Susan Cunningham, and Maureen Coffey. We're here for a special meeting. I want to thank anybody who they are here joining us in the boardroom and remotely, and some members of the public and county staff are participating remotely as well as here. And I think with that, we'll get going. I've got to please call the first regular agenda item, which is one agenda item of the very exciting presentation of the 2025 to 2034 Capital Improvement Program, I believe.
Indeed, presentation of the fiscal 25 to fiscal 23 Capital Improvement Plan.
All right, thank you. Mr. Manager, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to thank the board for allowing us the extra several days to work on our preparation. As you know, putting together a 10-year CIP with investments of the scope that we're talking about here, which is $4.5 billion, is no light undertaking. And we're going to go through a lot of information today. And as is pointed out in the final part of the presentation, we're going to put everybody right to work immediately on Tuesday of next week when we have a joint meeting with the school board and our first of several work sessions on June 6th. So all the material that we put together, there's a synopsis of that material that will be available now. The full book itself will probably be available by Saturday and online, but there's a lot of material for people to look at beforehand. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Cowan, who will walk you through the front part of the presentation, and then you'll also hear from Richard Stevenson, Maria Meredith, and Karen Talley. So over to you, Michelle.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. We are really excited to begin the kickoff of this biannual process. As Mark, should we pull up the slides? Is that possible?
There we go.
Sorry. Great. Who's controlling it? Next slide. Sorry. How am I? That's why we have technology investments in the CIP this year. Many, many.
You planned it.
So as Mark mentioned, the capital plan before you for your consideration over $4.5 billion in line with prior CIPs, increases in a number of areas that we'll talk about, but as always, it covers the full rainbow, if you will, of all of our infrastructure that provides the services to our citizens, ranging from water and sewer to 911 to art to libraries, transportation. Everything that we do on a daily basis requires facilities and infrastructure. Next slide, please. So in developing the CIP, there are a number of guiding principles that inform us. And I'm not going to spend time walking through each of these, but I would leave you with a couple, and then we're going to walk in, get into detail on a few, which is, as always, given the, Arlington, right? We were founded in 1920. Much of our infrastructure was in 1950, 1960s, again in the 80s. We are clearly middle-aged. And so what you will see is there is a balance between maintaining what we have and new. And so we really try to be thoughtful about how we approach that in a way that is measured, affordable, and actually implementable. You will hear as you go through this presentation, as well as at each work session with the departments, that we are a full service community. Unlike many other jurisdictions in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we are responsible for our roads, right? We do not have regional authorities that provide parks. So we are responsible for maintaining all of that infrastructure, 500 miles of water mains, almost 90 facilities, all of those things. So you will hear a lot about how we were reinvesting in that critical infrastructure for those services. At the same time, you will hear a lot about what's feasible. When we are running, 8 community centers that are operational every day, there are more than that, it's 8 libraries. The ability to completely renovate and redo each of those takes time, right? We are flying the plane while we are trying to renovate. Probably the most thing that you will hear about is that there's been great change since we last approved the CIP. There are macro changes as well as individual changes that affected the CIP. And so you will hear a common theme through this proposal from the manager, which is resiliency and flexibility, because we do not believe that that rate, pace, and complexity of change is going to change anytime soon and will continue. So if you move to the next slide, let's talk about some of the major assumptions that underlie this proposal, and where, of course, we are naturally mindful of again, greater change in the future or possible risk. So, of course, you all know what's going on with the regional and national economy. We are assuming construction inflation and supply chain issues supply chain has been an issue for the county, but also the region. We are assuming construction inflation across the board for most projects of 4%. We do have certain projects in the CIP where we are further along in design and engineering, again, particularly in that heavy infrastructure realm of water and sewer, we're assuming higher. But we recognize, and as you all are considering requests for different funding or accelerating things, that 4%, what we do know for sure is it's not correct, right? It could be higher, and as we look ahead, hopefully it will remain stable, but we will see. We are also assuming that the interest rates on the bonds that we issue is 5%. That's higher than what we've had in prior years. I think we're at a different trajectory right now with interest rates. Again, hopefully leveling out on the risk is, again, softening there, but it is something that we're monitoring closely as we look at future investments. We know that going forward, regulatory changes always impact the county. This CIP is a point-in-time proposal, what we know now, but on the regulatory horizon, we know things like PFAS for our water and sewer system, as well as other things like ADA or other things could impact costs. So we are mindful in what we've proposed to you, tries to maintain the flexibility to deal with those unknowns. And then finally, the CIP attempts to provide flexibility to address unanticipated events that require capital investment. And I think we have seen so much of that change and having to address that just over the last 2 years since adoption of our last CIP, and why we need to maintain financial flexibility and resiliency. So if you move to the next slide, we wanted to walk through what the major changes are since our last CIP. So as you know, the investment to support the preservation and affordability of Barcroft Apartments is on the county's balance sheet at $120 million outstanding. While we made that commitment during the last CIP, what has changed is the dramatic acceleration in interest rates and how that's affected our debt capacity and AHIF availability. And as we work through the planning process on that, we know that is, again, a factor in affordability going forward from a debt perspective. Over the last 2 years, we all have been working together on how we're responding to the mental health and substance use crisis in front of our community and regionally. So you will see in the CIP that we have a new proposal that is in line with our potential partnership with VHC on South Carlin Springs Road. That partnership involves the possibility of shared parking, as well as improvements in connectivity to the nature center, as well as the portion of the site that the county would maintain. So that is a new project with near-term investments over the next 2 years, and then investments that follow to address what I just described as other investments in that property. There is as we've talked about all this change in the community, we have been very much focused on resiliency, and in resiliency in a number of areas that we are, again, new to the CIP and what we'll be focusing on during this process. So you will see a proposal for a situational awareness center, which we have long known that our space, physical space that's needed to respond to major events, emergency events, whether it's climate, weather, election or otherwise related, has been inadequate. We have a earmark from Congress to support this proposal, but you will see initial investments in the next 3 years to actually implement that vision. We have included additional funding for redundancy for our water supply and interconnections, over $100 million over the 10-year proposal. Of course, water supply is clear to resiliency. And then finally, funding for a resilience hub to support at Lubber Run Community Center that can support our citizens and the community during emergency or weather event. Additionally, next slide, please. We all know that since COVID, the way we work has changed significantly. We have 3 buildings here in the courthouse area. This building that we sit in today, 2020 North 13th Street, as well as Court Square West. All of these buildings are underutilized in one way, shape, or form. And what we have begun to do is to analyze, well, how can we better utilize that space? And that can help both possibly save money, but it also will help us address additional service demands, for instance, like providing additional homeless service center space overflow capacity during, as we know, those numbers are going up, as well as consolidation of other uses from Court Square West, where we have a number of courts programs and back office space that can move into these other buildings. So you will see funding to both study and then implement some of this consolidation to make better use of our space and still do our work smartly. We also know that over the last 2 years, you all have adopted a number of plans, Plan Langston Boulevard and the Transit Strategic Plan as 2 examples, also the Sanitary Sewer Master Plan. And so when we walk through each area of investment in the CIP, you will see new programs that respond to those plans. At Plan Langston Boulevard, improvements or replacement of Lee Center, as well as transportation improvements. You also see from a transit strategic plan perspective that we have included funding to address some of those enhanced transit services midday and in other places, as well as land acquisition to expand our facilities to support full electrification of our fleet. That's a good transition to the transportation program and the trade-offs we've made. I'm really proud of our transportation program. We have almost $2 billion in investments in transportation alone. As I mentioned, some of those highlights, enhancements to transit, the full electrification of the ART fleet. But we know that that program is facing some headwinds. Much of that program is funded by the commercial real estate tax. And so we are mindful that we've had to make trade-offs because we cannot assume 5% year-over-year growth. We also know in that source, we also know that many of our transit projects have grown, they're very complex, as well as inflation has impacted them. So while we are trying to maximize grant funding to cover those projects, it's required some trade-offs that we'll walk you through in the transportation work session. Again, a really great program, but we're not able to do everything we would want to do in the transportation realm. Again, you'll see a significant increase in water and sewer infrastructure, mainly focused on resiliency and redundancy, but also in response to the sanitary sewer master plan and other priorities to keep our infrastructure sound. And then finally, as is typical in every CIP, we do have specific projects where timelines have changed. You know, the first 2 years of our CIP are generally pretty firm, especially obviously what's on the referenda, but in the out years it changes. So as we have worked through the balancing of project schedules, financial capacity, some things have moved out. We'll walk you through each of these changes in the work sessions, but as an example, like the new proposed fire station on Columbia Pike has been pushed out a few years as we work through implementation and financial capacity. So the thing, if we move to the next slide, the thing that the CIP is always financially, unlike many of our other plans that we do once and then we don't revisit for 10 or 15 years or whatever time period, the CIP is always a largely financially constrained document. And given the level of change that we've seen over the last 2 years with all the different things, right, that we just walked through, I think we're really pleased that we've been able to respond to those changes and address them and keep our community infrastructure and investment sound. What we do know is we need to maintain that flexibility going forward as we look to our next 10 years of capital investment. So Jason's going to walk through with you the way we usually work through what is that box of financial framework or constraint, and that is our debt policies. And for the most part, everyone is really focused on what we call the 10% rule, right? No more than 10% of your budget could go to debt service. But there is similarly, another metric that's included in our financial policies that very much focuses on, and been in place for 12 plus years, which focuses on annual increases in debt service. And so that policy reads on page 7 is that the growth in debt service should be sustainable and consistent with projected growth of revenues. The proposed CIP is consistent with that policy, but the annual debt service increases are still significant. So if you look at this chart, there's a lot of numbers here, but you can see that for county debt service that's paid from the general fund, that what we are projecting with this proposal is that the annual increase in debt service ranges from $4 to $5 million over the next 5 years, and with different changes, in the last 5 years. We believe that this level of investment is necessary. When you look at what's in our CIP, so much of it is maintaining what we have and funding our metro and regional obligations. But we are mindful that that $4 to $5 million a year is going to be the major constraining factor and not what we call the 10% rule. You will also hear us talk about, as we go through the work sessions and the rest of this presentation, that for things outside of our, quote, maintaining what we have investments, when you bring on a new facility or an expanded facility, operating costs accompany them. So a new fire station, as an example, can range in annual operating costs anywhere from $3 to $5 million. A new library can be another $1 million. A new community center, depending on its size or capacity, can be, again, in the couple $1 million range. So we have tried to pair, and we did this in our 6-year financial plan forecast, try to pair that increase in debt service with the impact on operating costs at the same time. And so what we have tried to propose is a CIP that is actually sustainable, provides the amount of flexibility, not maxing out our debt levels so that we are prepared for the next few years of change and can be resilient for the next few years of change to come. So with that, I think we'll turn it over to Jason for all the numbers.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'm just going to go through a little bit more about our debt portfolio, the other debt policies, and then talk about the referenda coming up. So if we go to slide 8. So what we have here is we wanted to show a little bit more detail on our debt portfolio and what makes it up, and talk a little bit about existing debt and how that rolls off, and then the new debt that we have in this plan CIP and how they all fit together. So what you have on this slide are 4 components. 2 of them are existing debt, which are, if you look at the bottom, the kind of bluish color and orange, that is all the existing debt and as it rolls off. So we have right now about $80 million in existing debt in fiscal 25, falling down to about $48 million by fiscal 2034. And what the orange is comprised of, that's Metro, our capital contributions to Metro alone. And we call it out in both the existing debt and the new debt because of how big of a component it takes up of both of those pieces. It's the single largest piece in our capital plan. And if you look on the right, it's the largest single project at about $317 million issued over the past 17 or 18 years for Metro alone. So $22 million currently. And then when you look at above in the green and the yellow, that's all of the new planned debt that we have in this CIP on the county side. So the green is all other county projects. So that's our community infrastructure. So main county projects, county facilities. It's our parks. It's our transportation, excluding Metro. That's the combined debt service over the 10-year period from the planned bond issuance. And then in the top, the gold or yellow, that's the new Metro obligations alone as well. So in both pieces, it's 25% or so of the debt in any given year, whether it's old debt or new debt. So it'll continue to be a very large, a significant portion of the county's debt obligations. And then on the right, it's just showing some of the other major projects we have. This isn't all of them, but this is just a subset of some projects that we have completed over the past 20 years. And we issue 20-year bonds. So even if we refinance them, we're refinanced over the same term, just at a lower rate, but they stay outstanding for 20 years. So these are different projects that we still have a portion of that debt being paid off. Things such as a couple different fire stations, Long Bridge, Lubber Run, Arlington Mill, the purchase of the Quincy site over by Washington and Liberty High School, 2020 14th Street North, and a few others. So if we go to the next slide, slide 9. This is the policy that everybody is normally familiar with as our constraining factor, and the one we typically focus on, which we call the 10%. And what that is that the county's combined, it's the county and schools debt service as a percentage of general governmental expenditures will not exceed 10%. As you see here, we are right now in the high eights in fiscal or planned in fiscal 25. But as you see, as we get to the out years, we get back up closer to that 10%, around 9.8%. Now, we always end up being close to that 10%. We intentionally, it's our constraining factor. So to the extent we can afford it, we try to address as many projects as possible in the county CIP with debt. Using other funds first, but to the extent we need debt to issue debt, but remaining under 10% and wanting to leave a little bit of wiggle room just in case there are, either project, cost overruns on projects or changes to the county's financial position, that it gives us a little bit of wiggle room to react there. And so we get to about 9.8% in fiscal 31 and 32. And how this compares to the last 10 years CIP, which was just done 2 years ago, it's fairly close, fairly similar in terms of the policy. We're a little bit better, whereas we're at 9.8 as the high water mark. We're about about 10 basis points higher at 9.9. So it's just a little bit lower than we were 2 years ago over the 10-year time frame. So if we go to the next slide, slide 10, want to talk about some of the other policies that we have regarding debt. So we have a per capita debt to per capita income requirement that it is no greater than 6%. And within this new CIP, we remain well below that at about 5.4% is the peak in fiscal 27, falling down to about 4.5% by fiscal 4. There is another policy, which is outstanding debt as a percentage of the market value of taxable property within the county, that is no greater than 3%. We will always be below this, just given all the other policies that the county has would be exceeded well before this one. So we are in the range of 1.3 to 1.5% over the 10-year time horizon. And then we already talked about this one in a separate slide earlier. Michelle covered it, but that the debt service over 10 years to be no greater than the historical 10-year growth in revenues. And again, that's combined 3.6% growth in our CIP versus a total combined county schools a revenue growth of 4.4% over fiscal 13 through fiscal 23, using our audit as that calculation. So if we go to slide 11, I want to show you all just a different perspective to think about debt and how we issue debt for different funds and different entities within the county. So what you see here on the left is we looked at within our audits, within our ACFRs, the breakout of our asset base. So looking at historical values for our asset base on a depreciated basis, what is the county's versus what is the schools, and to compare those assets. And so when you look over the past decade, it is roughly a 2/3 to 1/3 split. County 2/3 of the base, schools the other is the other 1/3, and it stays fairly consistent. So you see here 34 to 35%. So it's a pretty consistent split between us. On the right, what I wanted to show is an example of the referenda that we have approved over the past 14 years. And so what I have is on the right are different timeframes in which we're looking at the split between what was put on the referenda for schools versus what was for the county. And for the county, when I say that, it is our 3 that we do for the general county infrastructure, which is community infrastructure, metro and transportation, and parks and recreation. So those 3 referenda specifically on the county side. And you see, if you're looking over 14 years of the first row, schools had about 47% of the total referenda approved, and the county had about 53. If you go to the shortest end of the analysis at the bottom, over the 2020 through 2022 referenda, which is 3 referenda cycles, because we did in the off year due to COVID, you have 241 million for schools, and you have 232 for the county. So schools actually had a little bit more at 51% versus 49 for the county. And this is just, so when you look at things such as like debt service, debt capacity, it's just helpful to keep in mind that while the schools is maybe more closer to a 50-50 split of the operating side, on the capital side in terms of assets, it's not the same. So it's just to give perspective as you look at things like that, that no single group, parks or facilities or transportation department, they don't have a certain allocation of the debt. It's, we meet all of the needs, but it's based on the assets and the needs of the assets and the asset base. So if we go to the next slide, we want to talk now about the 2024 referenda. As you know, the CIP has, the 24 referenda, which is typically the first 2 or 3 years of the CIP, and then there are out-year forecasts for future referenda that are planning figures. So in the proposed FY 2025 through 2034 CIP, there is a total of $174.4 million being proposed under 3 referenda categories for general county infrastructure projects. So with community infrastructure, it is about $76.2 million. And this is for projects and programs such as the Arlington Neighborhoods Program, our courts police building improvements, some site work, demolition and planning for the Carlin Springs site, consolidation of our Department of Public Safety, Communications and Emergency Management, I think I got that right, DIPSM, consolidation of their facilities, and then some other general county infrastructure projects. $25.8 million for parks, and this is including construction of Drew Park and then 3 urban parks, as well as the Emerging Uses Program and Natural Resiliency Program, trail and bridge modernization, parks land acquisition, and then various other parks renovations and improvements. Metro and transportation, $72.4 million. Of this, $44 million of this is for Metro alone. $22 million is for our paving program. And then there are various much smaller amounts for a few different smaller transportation needs, such as bridge maintenance renovation and others. On the right here, you see that the Utilities Fund, they are also seeking $14.2 million. And this is mainly for the county's capital contributions to the Washington Aqueduct and then various smaller water and sewer maintenance projects. Now, we're not going to go into detail on all those projects right now. Those will come in a broader discussion as we have the individual work sessions on each program or department. So if we go to the next slide, we just wanted to show you, this is the full 10-year ask of bonds and bond referenda. So what you see here is in a little bit more detail of what we just saw on the previous slide. So on this page here, we have Parks and Recreation, and you see, the individual projects by planned referenda year. So you see, Drew Park, $1.5 million, the 3 urban parks at $8 million, nature resiliency 1.5, emergent uses 1.5. You see Metro below there, 2-year total of $44 million. Arlington Neighborhoods Program at $14 million. Connect Arlington at just under $1 million in the 24 CIP. If we go to the next slide, we'll see the rest. So you see transportation and then governmental facilities. And so this is the full list of projects, see the $174 million combined. And now we do have a few projects for utilities. We just didn't show them here. We're just showing the general county projects that are being proposed in the manager's CIP. So actually, Maria will be taking over the next slide about how we pay for the CIP.
All right, so this slide illustrates the many funding sources involved in paying for this $4.5 billion CIP. Many of which are dedicated and restricted to specific capital activities. The bulk of the funding, or 34%, comes from general obligation bonds. $189 million of the county's general obligation fund source is the 2024 bond referendum that voters must approve in November 2024 before those projects can be funded. The Transportation Capital Fund and our state, federal, and regional grant funds are all restricted in use. These 3 sources together represent about 28% of the overall capital funding portfolio. We also have support from the general fund in the pay-as-you-go category, funding 10% of the CIP. We have funds that are carried over from previously approved funding in prior fiscal years. And lastly, 13% of the funding comes from short-term financing, tax increment financing, and developer contributions. And again, one of the most important takeaways from this slide is that much of these fundings just mentioned are restricted in their use. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about project labor agreements and the CIP, but first I just want to remind everybody that all of the county's construction contracts in excess of $250,000 are and will be subject to our prevailing wage requirements, which became effective in January of '22. When we were discussing project labor agreements with the board last November, we recommended selecting a project as a pilot for use with a project labor agreement during the CIP process, and we'll discuss this more in the upcoming work sessions. We also discussed that the pilot would be in a project valued at or above $25 million. Those larger projects typically have a greater diversity of trades utilized. We have looked across the CIP, and those listed on this slide may be good options for using a project labor agreement. And as I said, we're going to talk more about this at work sessions. Next slide, please. Resiliency investments are proposed in almost all CIP program areas and recognize the clear intersection between resiliency and climate. Starting on the right of this graph, of this chart, we have transit investments. The 10-year plan includes funds to transition the existing fleet of compressed natural gas buses to battery electric buses and to acquire land for future bus storage and charging infrastructure. It also includes investments in enhanced transit service per the recently adopted transit strategic plan. In terms of facility energy updates, the plan continues to invest in smart and flexible energy resilience and collaborates with community partners to invest, as Michelle mentioned, in mental health resilience. There's also an expanded program to install solar panels on county facilities. Next is vehicle charging, and it includes infrastructure for both county and public use. Then environmental compliance and innovation. This CIP ensures that we meet the second set of MS4 permit requirements for water quality and moves forward with significant investments at the water pollution control plant for how we address solids and new innovative opportunities for reuse. Resiliency, on the lower left, there are a number of infrastructure investments, which I'll talk to more in detail on the next page. On the last slide, I talked about the areas of environmental and resiliency goals, but here are some specific examples of projects and programs in this area. First, as Michelle mentioned earlier, in terms of emergency preparedness, the CIP includes an investment in a situational awareness intelligence unit, which will allow various public safety partners to co-locate in a shared space to monitor, filter, and disseminate key information. It also includes the Lubber Run Resiliency Hub, which will enable the Lubber Run Community Center to become a resiliency hub to serve the community during an event such as a long-term power disruption. In terms of stormwater capacity, a significant portion of our stormwater program includes long-term resiliency investments to address flooding and stormwater infrastructure. The CIP continues the natural resiliency program from the last CIP with enhancements like forestry restoration and stream improvements. Natural resiliency allows DPR, the Department of Parks and Recreation, to study and implement projects that provide recreational opportunities and amenities in concert with addressing or creating flood capacity and manage stormwater. In terms of technology, there are also many important back office investments, especially in the area of technology, that are investments to protect county data, systems, and equipment, ensure operational continuity with benefits including improved redundancy, resiliency, scalability, and enhanced security against ransomware, and anytime, anywhere access to our applications. And then last, the CIP provides new investments for backup water supplies to protect the county's source water. And I'm going to hand off to Karen to speak about a little bit more about the different program areas.
Thank you, Maria. So as you can see, there are only a handful or less of new projects in each of our major CIP program areas. And so as both Michelle and Jason have described, we've put great effort into managing our debt and the affordability of our overall CIP. This is a great direct reflection of that. And so as stated, these projects are new from the previously adopted CIP, and the majority of the projects are in the beginning of the CIP out to the middle or the belly of the document. We'll go into more detail on some of these projects in later slides. Next slide. This slide may look familiar to you from the operating budget, and it illustrates the services that the Department of Environmental Services provides to our community, working in the background to ensure a safe and sustainable community. And so this critical backbone infrastructure relies on capital funding to maintain a state of good repair and to meet evolving community needs. And so to highlight just a few, excuse me, the CIP includes investments to ensure our 36 bridges are all in good condition, to pave and maintain our 1,058 lane miles of road, our streets are safe to walk and bike, our existing buildings are in a state of good repair, and construction of new facilities are all done in an environmentally sustainable way. These capital investments ensure storm resiliency, water reliability, and maintain our sanitary sewer. The CIP focuses on energy efficiency with investments in battery electric bus conversions, EV charging infrastructure, and building investments in solar and energy performance. Next slide. Excuse me. In stormwater, the proposed CIP includes $334 million, a slight increase over the last CIP at $331 million. The proposed CIP investments are approximately 2/3 for stormwater capacity and flood mitigation, with the remaining 1/3 focused on water quality in streams and working towards a state of good repair for existing stormwater assets. In the area of stormwater capacity, investments are proposed in each major watershed. 57% of the stormwater investments are in the 4 primary watersheds based on flooding issues. Spout Run at $70 million, Torreyson at 17.8, Crossman at close to $37 million, and Lubber Run at $67 million. Our water quality investments put us on track to meet a 40% reduction required for our second MS4 permit. We're working on compliance plan for a 100% reduction required for the third permit cycle, which ends in fiscal year 2031. Next slide. The proposed utility CIP includes $880 million, a $260 million increase over the last 10-year CIP. The largest category of investment in our water sewer system is in maintenance capital, totaling $388 million. This will ensure a state of good repair for the close to 500 miles of sanitary sewer and water lines and pump lift stations that provide essential water and sewer services to our residents and businesses, and a significant increase in our commitment and support of the Washington Aqueduct, which increased to fund previously deferred as well as currently planned and improvements and capital improvements at that facility. Our water distribution system increase is primarily due to the significant investments in water resiliency, and we continue to make significant investments at the water pollution control plant, where we're moving forward with the solids master plan. That project will modernize our infrastructure on the solids handling side of the plant and also provide for innovative resource recovery. Next slide. Over the 10 years, the county's projected contributions total $398.5 million in Metro. We fund this need primarily with a combination of GEO bonds and state transit aid. The CIP includes $240 million, an average of $24 million annually, in GEO bonds to meet those needs. Almost $159 million of that is transit aid. Of the bonded amount, $44.3 million is included in the 2024 referenda, as noted on the previous slide. Transportation has a wide array of assets that help to manage and maintain a sustainable, multimodal transportation system. In their system, they have assessments for paving, bridges, and sidewalks. The paving assessment is annual, and we strive for a paving condition asset index of 75 to 80. The bridges are inspected and reported on at least biennially, and the goal is for our bridges to have a rating of 6 to 7, which is a national rating system. The sidewalk program was new in our previously adopted CIP, and DES is working to complete their sidewalk survey to help prioritize the sidewalks that get addressed in their zone maintenance program. Next slide. The transportation program is close to half of the overall CIP investment at $1.9 billion. Funding for the transportation program is a mix of federal, state, regional, and local services. The Street Safety Improvement Program totals $26 million and supports our Vision Zero efforts. In addition to the street safety program, programs such as Walk Arlington, Bike Arlington, Neighborhood Complete Streets, and even our paving program help to advance the goals of the Vision Zero program. Bike Walk Arlington improvements continue to be a priority with almost $79 million in investments, including $17 million for capital bike share over the 10 years. This also includes completion of the important connection of the Arlington National Cemetery Wall Trail. Next slide. The CIP also includes $144 million for paving to maintain our PCI at 75 to 80 and in a state of good repair to ensure safe conditions for vehicles, but as importantly, transit, school buses, and bikers, walkers. We continue our investment for sidewalk, curb, and gutter maintenance. As a result of the concrete study that DES completed, this program will get our existing sidewalks back to a state of good repair within the 10 to 15 years. Funding of $13 million is included, but funding from the paving program is also used to support this program and our walkers. The bridge replacement and a renovation program include the Arlington Ridge Bridge that is being done in partnership with Alexandria City and the pedestrian bridge at the Shirlington Bridge. In the area of transit, the proposed CIP includes continuation of important projects like the ART O&M facility and 2 new metro entrances at Crystal City and Boston. Next slide. Of the 26 square miles in the county, we have 950 acres of parkland. As you may know, our park systems was once again ranked within the top 5 in the nation in the top 100 cities. The maintenance and improvement of these assets is vital to sustaining that ranking. The Parks program has 4 different assessments that they do to maintain their portfolio of assets. The Assets Tool Refresh was last completed in 2023 and will be refreshed in fiscal year 2028. Their synthetic turf fields are assessed on an ongoing basis, and the trail's pavement condition is completed every 4 to 5 years. Finally, the bridges inventory condition assessment is completed every 8 to 10 years, depending on the type of bridge. Next slide. The investment in parks in the CIP is close to $309 million. We're pleased with the department's development of a new program to address the ongoing needs and the capital maintenance of our courts facilities. In keeping with our state of good repair priority, the Park CIP includes the program maintenance capital totaling $114 million to ensure that our parks, trails, bridges, playgrounds, and fields remain in good condition and safe for our park users. In our synthetic turf program, we're progressing towards the highly anticipated conversion of the grass fields at Kenmore to synthetic turf. This is a great partnership with APS and our sports partners. The CIP also includes funding for the design and construction of Gateway Park and a variety of parks and open space projects in Crystal City, Pentagon City that are in line with our sector plans. The proposed CIP also includes funding for construction of the lower site for the Arlington Boathouse with the National Park Service, as well as construction funding for the upper site in the latter years of the CIP. This plan assumes continued collaboration and funding contributions from Boathouse stakeholders and partners. Next slide. The Arlington Neighborhood Program totals close to $98 million over the 10-year plan. This level of funding will cover construction of projects as well as a new program for small neighborhood projects as outlined in the Arlington Neighborhood Study. The $28 million of existing balances are mostly allocated to projects through the review process with RNAC, and those projects will be executed over the next 3 to 4 years. Next slide. The Facilities Program is responsible to manage 89 county-owned facilities and 4 leased facilities. to help plan the development of their investments to meet a state of good repair with county assets. They have a condition assessment of major assets every 5 to 7 years. The next planned assessment is planned in fiscal year 2029. Next slide. The facilities program investment totals $383 million over the 10-year period. The largest program is for facilities maintenance capital totaling $103 million. Our real estate footprint includes 92 buildings and is 2.4 million square feet. In the same realm of maintaining aging facilities, the CIP continues the multi-year phased plan for continued improvements at the court's police building, which is over 25 years old. In the near term, this will focus on very aged technology infrastructure and courtroom renovations. In the courthouse area, we're making strategic investments in the 2020 North Courthouse Road building, which will allow us to consolidate human service functions in this building. While the plan will also consolidate offices from the Court Square West building, where we plan to vacate over the next 7 to 10 years. The CIP also includes funding for both the Quincy and Carlin Springs site. At Quincy, it includes funding for the consolidation of fire logistic functions where fire vehicles are currently stored. And at Carlin Springs, the CIP includes placeholder funding for the anticipated phased redevelopment and efficient use of the site to include shared parking. The parking on site would be a shared cost between the county and Virginia Hospital Center, assuming approval of an anticipated site plan for a behavioral health care facility. The parking set aside for county uses would be available capacity for future site development with other partners and for future parking as improvements are made to connect the site to the Nature Center. Our technology program intersects with all of the programs I've previously spoken about and is core to our county infrastructure and business processes. We have over 70 miles of fiber optic cable to refresh and maintain, along with many other pieces of hardware. As we continue to get more efficient, some of our hardware assets will be reduced and we'll move to more subscription models for our technology. Next slide. Technology, again, is at the core of so much that we do across all lines of business, and we have an investment of over $207 million. $111 million is included in the Enterprise Technology Program, which covers everything from refreshment of laptops and desktops to also including equipment upgrades and cloud migration. It also includes more than $14 million in investments in systems that have been in place for over 10 years. That includes our financial and HR system implementation, as well as the record management system that was implemented in 2004. And finally, this category also includes investments in our public safety communications, vehicles, and equipment at about $85 million. More than $24 million for public safety communications equipment, such as public safety radios and upgrades to the radio system. Over $36 million for public safety vehicles and associated technologies, such as replacement of our fire trucks and ladders, the fire utility vehicles used during special events, upgrades to the fire command vehicle, and a new fire rehabilitation vehicle. And with that, I will turn it over to Richard Stevenson.
So I'll give Karen a break here and walk you through the last set of slides. Thank you, Karen. So the next two slides illustrate our existing commitments. And as Karen and others have shared, we presented a whole host of projects for the next 10 years. But as you know, departments are very actively working on a significant amount of projects throughout the community right now. So this slide and the next highlights some of that work currently going on around the county. And at each of the work sessions with departments, we'll provide you with more detail on what's going on in each of the program areas. And so a number of these projects that are on this slide and the following you've already heard about, because these projects in the CIP are multi-year. So we are actually, for a number of these, already began either planning processes or have begun working on them with their completion in the 10-year CIP proposal. So in our facilities, we have a Fire Station 8, which is the new fire station to replace the old undersized station on Langston Boulevard in the Halls Hill neighborhood. In the courthouse area, there are several projects in process. Work continues in the Courts Police Building, the Bosman Government Center, and at 2020 14th Street. Near Central Library, we have work in that facility, along with work on Quincy property near W&L. And then throughout the county, we have a number of energy projects related to solar and EV charging. For Parks and Recreation, I think Karen mentioned this, there's no denying that Arlington is home to some of the most beautiful and highly used parks, trails, and fields in our area. And to help keep our portfolio in good condition, there are a number of projects underway in this area. Beloved for its tennis courts, and we're will be under construction in the Upper Bluemont Park, currently in design and moving toward the start of construction. And as you know, for that particular park, it sits in a resource protection area, so there was a lot of work done to design the tennis courts, the lighting, the picnic shelters, landscaping, and stormwater management. We're working in Doctor's Run, which will replace the children's playground and improve site circulation and site furnishings. And also underway our synthetic field replacement in concert with schools. And of course, 2 exciting projects underway in the planning stages with the Boathouse Project and Gateway Park. For stormwater and stormwater management, there is much focus on expanding the county's infrastructure to handle storm runoff, as well as meeting our regulatory requirements for water quality and capacity improvements to help mitigate flooding for the Spout Run watershed, which are currently under design. And then work continues through all major watersheds throughout the county, including Columbia Pike and 4 Mile Run. So with transportation, the transportation CIP includes a number of complete streets and transit projects, such as the ones listed here. Underway is construction on Columbia Pike multimodal street improvements and the Columbia Pike transit stations. And in Crystal City, construction of segment 1 of the Transitway extension to Pentagon City, which will be coordinated with streetscape work throughout Pentagon City and Crystal City. Karen mentioned the Arlington Neighborhoods Program. This program currently has 17 projects that are in various stages of completion throughout the county. And these projects include street and intersection improvements, parks, and neighborhood beautification projects. And then finally, for utilities, a lot of work in resiliency and redundancy of our infrastructure, which is a continual focus to this program. We have key projects at the Water Pollution Control Plant, project called Regen, that will upgrade the end of life of the solids handling processes. Also, there is a large rehabilitation project of approximately 2,200 linear feet of cast iron force main located uphill from the Gulf Run pump station. And many other projects, which again, as I said, we'll highlight throughout the work session. It's also been mentioned we're planning for the future. So this slide just illustrates a number of projects in the various program areas, planning for specific parks and public facilities of Quincy Park and Virginia Highlands. We have Drew Park and Fairfax Drive public spaces, along with Langston Boulevard public spaces, and establishing a new park trailhead at 26 and Old Dominion. For our facilities, we have several back-of-house support functions at Trade Center and Carlin Spring. And as mentioned, we're with the planning along Langston Boulevard corridor. The proposed CIP includes money for the Lee Community Center site. Again, similar in transportation and also in fire and emergency management services planning going along in those areas. So we, in budget, continually, it's important, we continually want to focus also not only on the assets in our CIP, but on its impact of future operating budgets. And Michelle, when she walked through a number of slides, highlighted some of those out-year pressures which we'll need to address. As she mentioned, new and expanded projects typically require more annual funding for maintenance, whether it's increased size of the facility or the programming that's placed within the new facility. and the debt service that goes along with those investments. And so we talked earlier about the incremental cost of debt service with the proposed CIP and the pressures it puts on us on the operating budget with all the other competing demands and the constrained resources that we have. So as you can see throughout the years, these are some of the out-year costs projected for some of these proposals in the CIP. And then just to highlight a couple more, the generous donation by Boeing to support the Longbridge Park facility will soon be expended, and the general fund will need to pick up that net tax support that will hit in 26 or late 26 or early 27. And then again, any new facilities may need staffing and then the fire station on Columbia Pike, as Michelle mentioned, will need both additional staff and equipment and resources for that project. Thanks to on our public engagement, we get a lot of assistance from our comms partners as we're working through the process over the months prior to the CIP. We do outreach through a variety of avenues. We had almost 3,200 Arlington residents provide us input on their top priority areas for major infrastructure investments in the CIP through the outreach to nonprofit partners, at pop-up engagement events, advertisement on art buses and yard signs, and through a number of social media platforms. And the heavy burden of that was done through February and March this spring, which helped us inform the proposed CIP the manager's making here this afternoon. And we'll continue to collect feedback from the community through the CIP process. The next slide shows something we rolled out last CIP 2 years ago, which was a map and project page for the community, where it's an interactive map. And we are in the process of loading all the proposed projects into the GIS environment, and that should be updated later this week or early next week. But this tool allows you to see the type of capital investments that have been made in the county, as well as where the investments have been made. It includes projects that have been completed over the last several years, projects that are currently underway, and projects that are in our proposed CIP. And so with this tool, users are able to filter information by program area and category, for instance, transportation program or complete streets category. And then once you filter that information, the user can then zoom into the neighborhood to see what projects are maybe impacting them directly. The tool also allows the user to filter by approved master plan and show the aligned projects. So we think this data will be really helpful to the community and the board in a better understanding of the types of infrastructure we have all across the county and making sure we are making the best in meeting the needs of our diverse population. As you know, about 2 weeks ago, the superintendent proposed the school CIP, totaling $681 to $696 million. Their CIP is in a range as a result of 3 options that the superintendent provided to move the Montessori preschool into the Career Center. The referendum proposed at this time ranges from $63 to $78 million based on those options, and will be incorporated into the county's referenda after the school adopts their CIP later in June. Their CIP also includes almost $20 million for major infrastructure projects and almost $7 million for various kitchen, entrance, and security renovations. And then finally, the timeline. We are here this afternoon proposing to you. As mentioned, we'll have a number of work sessions with you over the next several weeks. June 4th with joint school board, county board, followed by transportation, debt, and metro. We'll hold a public hearing on July 10th and final wrap up on the 16th, followed by final board adoption later this month. So with that, I'll turn it over to the manager.
So first of all, thank you for your patience. We spend about an hour. I usually don't like to do long presentations, but something of this magnitude certainly deserves that, and there'll be a lot more conversation with thousands of assets covering about 250,000 people who live here and visit here. But I want to let you know that we were able to boil it all down to one page on an infographic, which we've left with each of you. This will also be posted online, that does a summary of what's in the $4.5 billion proposal. And so I will tell you, in all the years we've worked on CIPs, this is the most comprehensive, most thorough. The one we did 2 years ago was just coming off of COVID, and we were just getting our legs underneath us for a 10-year CIP. We spent a lot of time readjusting some of our priorities and dealing with all the things that we need to balance. And as I like to say, this is my proposal, and now it rests with you for further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it was a long presentation, but there's a lot here. Thank you. And I'm glad that we did this in a special meeting. Colleagues, we obviously have work sessions coming up. We do have to, we have a little item of business. We need to adopt the revised meeting schedule before we finish up this afternoon. But for the moment, any questions now before we get into our work sessions? Mr. DeFranti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very briefly, the full proposal will be online, or will be online.
Right, so to be specific, the material that's going online right now includes this presentation that we just made, the slides, a manager's message, an introduction to the capital plan, our updated financial and debt management policies, the list of all the funding allocations year by year, and then also this infographic. We have, and I don't know approximately how many project pages, is it about 200? Oh, 500. About 500 pages worth of material where we go page by page and we have more detail on each of the projects. I'd say right now of those 500 pages, we're about 400 pages done. And so rather than posting it piecemeal, we'll do our best to get it up over the next few days. I think that today being Tuesday, certainly by the end of this week, and there's more than enough to chew on between now and then, but I understand people will be anxious to see the details.
Yeah, I'm sure they will on certain numbers. Go ahead.
Rush, I just was trying to, get a sense and be efficient on process. And I just think for the throngs of people watching and for those in the room, we did get a briefing on this before today, in addition, a draft version of this. So just appreciate all the work. Thank you, Madam Chair, the work of staff to get this ready. And then the process is all ahead. I want to be efficient about how I'm asking questions.
Thank you. Ms. Coffey?
Yeah, not to be redundant, but is the map that you showed a very nifty tool? Do we have somewhere that it is easily accessible and easy to get to on the website?
Yes. So
You got it.
Okay, so in the document, in the presentation, there is a link to the map. We're still working on getting it updated with the projects from this CIP. However, you'll have the projects updated from the adopted budget for 25, as well as previous projects that are in there. But the adopted CIP will need a few more days to get all of that updated.
Into the map,
But the
okay.
link is in the PowerPoint presentation.
And the only way to get to it on the website is through the link in the PowerPoint?
No, you can actually go to
Okay.
the proposed website.
Okay, got it.
And there's a link there as well.
Great, that's what I was
Yes.
looking for. Thank you.
If you also type in CIP, it will pop up with the information.
Always good to have easy searches. Thank you. Mr. Karantonis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just sent you an email asking you also for the electronic, the Excel spreadsheet with the projects, because part of the work on the CIP is to actually understand really the stacking of all this and the timelines. I wanted to ask a couple of things that are of general, that are focused on the first slides, the first dozen of slides, which is, how we manage risk and how close we come to our 10%. So if I may compare it to the last time, I see that we are coming really close, for me, a little bit too close for comfort, at the 10% limit already in fiscal year 28 to 23. So what I see is a prolonged stay in the close proximity of that limit. What kind of risk awareness should this signal?
Well, I think if you look at the 10-year horizon and you look back at all of our prior CIPs, this is probably a pretty consistent way that we present this where we get close to that 10%. But if you go back 2 or 3 CIPs ago and you look at where we are today, we probably showed we were in the mid 9s to high 9s, but you see we're actually in the mid to upper 8 percentile right now. We generally tend to be, just due to natural delays in the projects. You know, we have CIPs, we have intentions to do projects, but 500 pages, that breadth of projects, whether it be county facilities, they slip. And so we end up usually having some breathing room from there. We're very conservative in some of our plans. So that getting close to that 10%, it's usually in the out years. If we start getting close to it early and we start feeling like it's too close for comfort, we have typically a couple years to maybe amend future projects, the new debt. So on that, the second slide you have there with the debt portfolio, the 2 colors that are the new debt, we can look at a subset of those projects, the new CIP projects, and potentially delay them if we have to, if we believe we may actually get too close to our policies. So I would say from a risk perspective, it's something we always monitor, but given that we do a CIP every 2 years, that gives us the ability to kind of re-baseline ourselves and see where we are and find out, are we comfortable with, you know, the assumptions we have there, where we've planned. We want to make sure at the same time we're doing the projects that we should be doing, as many as we can if there is a need. So I think, you know, having a little bit of breathing room, but not too much in the future, allows us to program efficiently, you know, as many projects as we can afford.
I did want to add one thing, which is that we've wrestled over this issue many times, but we're assuming somewhere between a 2 and 3% growth in expenditures year over year. So that 10% ratio has a numerator and a denominator.
Yes.
We're assuming that denominator grows at a somewhat conservative percentage, as Jason said. This past year, the county board adopted a budget that grew at 6%. That was unusual, but for good purposes. We've also experienced years back in 2008, 2009, and then also in COVID, where our operating budget grew at a much lower percentage. So there's a series of assumptions that go into that. What tends to happen as the board goes through it, we're assuming about a 2 or 3% growth. Historically, I think you see that the growth has been somewhere between 3 and 4%. So we're conservative there, and that's intentional. But if those numbers were a little bit higher in the growth assumptions, then those percentages fall back from the 10% level.
Are there specific types of projects, let's say transportation projects, for example, they tend to be less predictable, right? As I experience them. So they oscillate a little bit more in there, you know, from prediction to actual.
So we do,
cost.
we took this approach last time, and people should feel free to add to this, which is we make an assumption based on the projected costs that we won't actually spend everything that we anticipate on a project. It's about, I think it's at 20% of it that we assume, because of the vagaries of time, that we have found, gone back, done an analysis in our transportation projects. No matter how hard we plan and no matter how hard we execute, we usually only get 80% of the way there. So we build that in, so that creates a little bit of room for us in the execution phase. We have found, and working on CIPs over a 10-year period, we have much more amplified the issue we have in operating budgets, which is you're making assumptions. And I don't even want to do this analogy, but somehow it's like that cone of uncertainty when you have like a hurricane going. As you get further out, things are much less certain, so we try to take account for that.
But you know what drives. So if you expect bigger hurricanes, you have to you know, to increase also the.
I think it's something we evaluate
amplitude.
each CIP is, such as we're upping a little bit the construction cost inflation factor from 3 to 4. We're still staying conservative on the expenditure growth. You know, if you go back 2 or 3 CIP cycles ago, we were not so far, but you know, comfortably under, because of our conservative assumptions, that we were able to absorb the Barcroft transaction and be able to execute that because we had the capacity. So that's 150 million, now 120 because of the 30 million that you all have contributed to pay down that debt, which is very helpful. But we're able to quickly react to that because we had capacity within our policies, just due to that, conservatism and having higher expenditure growth, a little bit lower debt service. That combination kept us, whereas we would have thought we'd be in the mid-9s, we're actually a little bit lower. So we continue to monitor. It's always in the back of our minds, but we end up, having time typically to react should we start feeling uncomfortable.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think just along those lines, another uncertainty is EPS, because they've got their own CIP, and it's good that we're going to be meeting with them, because that kind of adds more uncertainty into the whole issue. Thank you. Had just a couple quick questions. On the Metro slide, that slide 8, which is great, showing, I think you said about 25% of our total debt goes to Metro. How does that compare to other jurisdictions in the region? Do we know? Are you able to provide that slide for other jurisdictions or something close to it?
I can provide a real time, what their subsidy is right now in proportion to their budget, perhaps. Everybody chooses a different way to fund Metro. Some people with bonds, some people with purely, maybe more pay-go. So I think it'll really depend on what funding source people use to make their contributions. But I could probably put something together to give you a relative.
Sort of a relative thing would be helpful, because we are embarking on this regional effort to look at Metro funding, and I suspect we're a bit of an outlier in how much we put in as a proportion of our budget or proportion of our population. So
As the taxpayer-supported proportion.
exactly, yeah, no, and
That's
that's
the
kind of
most
crucial,
important thing.
right? And I think it's important that those that are making these
Local
decisions
taxpayers.
understand how much our taxpayers are already burdened by it, because they may not, because they're not experiencing it themselves. So anything you could provide on that would be very helpful. Also, another comparative thing I'd be interested in is very interesting, the asset base, comparing, the 2/3 of the county, 1/3 schools, but yet the money that goes in is more like half and half. Is that typical of other jurisdictions? I could see where schools are different. They all have kitchens and, they may be more expensive or something. Is that typical? Do you know?
I don't know necessarily. I would imagine, a school is probably, a lot more staff per facility than maybe our governmental facilities, requiring maybe more operating costs than us. So maybe more heavy on the operating side for a smaller asset base.
But this was CIP that you were doing, I think. This wasn't operating, was it? Or was it? Maybe it was, including operating, the 1/3. It was the
No,
asset
but-
base.
Maybe I misunderstood the question.
It was slide 11. What I was wondering about, it's slide 11, asset base and debt.
Right.
Is that relationship similar to what other jurisdictions have?
So on the asset side, whether 1/3 of their assets are
Yeah.
schools, I don't know. I think we'd have to take a look. I think it would really depend on, the phase of maybe a government. Are they, and the type of, the demographics of a jurisdiction? Are they, is it more families where it's heavily on young children and needing more schools? Is that where the investment's happening? I think we can take a look at that, but I don't have that data.
Yeah, I mean, if it's really hard,
I was going to add one thing to that, because
Yeah.
the purpose of that slide, people will say, oh, well, clearly schools is getting too much for the
Right.
referendum. That's really not the purpose behind the slide. I want to try to clarify that a little bit. It is absolutely correct that our asset base is 2/3 county, 1/3 schools. And when you think about it, we had a number of slides that talked about the thousands of PCs we have and all the vehicles we have. We're in hundreds of lines of business, schools in one line of business. It's incredibly important. And we have access to other funds, sometimes with revenue-supported bonds and other bonds that aren't included there. So I don't want to overstate the picture, but I thought it was really important to put it in there, because people need to understand that in proportion, when we're looking at a capital plan, which is talking about investment in assets, those taxpayer-supported bonds, almost, on half of them go to schools, and that's not a bad thing. This county board supports that, and I've supported it as a manager. But to keep that in perspective, I get anxious sometimes when we have a conversation where the schools come forward and say, well, we need to do this, this, and this, and that's okay, but it needs to be put against the backdrop of all the assets we have. You need to keep that in mind constantly.
Right, and I think that's helpful, and I think what I was looking for is actually a little more context. Is this kind of the usual way it works? And I see our JFAC is represented here today, and maybe that's something they can look at a little bit too. So Mr. Freeze, I've asked you, it might be a fair amount of work, so maybe not worth what the information is, but anything that's sort of comparative on both of these two things about sort of how it stacks up in the region would just be helpful for me to understand a little bit the more context.
He has plenty of free time now.
He might need to rest up a little bit. Thank you. Just see if I had one other. Oh. Yeah, I would like at some point, and I know we're going to get it, more information on the Lee Arts Center, seeing that we have a lot of interest in that, and looking at the only information that's on here is demolition, which might have some people sort of concerned. So I'm sure we're getting more.
I just want to make sure that was, and this is directly at Gene, who's sitting out there. There will be no demolition of the Lee Center. That was a typo. That word will never appear anywhere on the public record after today, because that was a mistake. But I did want to say the numbers we put out there, and I think it was in FY31, are, I just want to say, they are, and I've already talked to Gene about this, they're not informed by the analysis we've already done, because we haven't done the study yet. And the costs there, I will say, is not just a good faith, it's a very good faith placeholder given the amount of money involved. But we do not know, because we have not gone through the planning process of what's involved. But it speaks to at least my commitment, and the board will have to make its own determination about maintaining a public facility there that's available to the community. We had real challenges about shoehorning it in, but I thought it was important to put it there.
Thank you. All right, and we'll have more discussion about that, but I thought that might, prompt some interest in folks watching. I think that's it on the questions. Colleagues, we do need to just go over the schedule, and I wonder, Mr. Kushner, if you can put up, I think you've got a little presentation on, or just a little overview of the changes that we've got that we need to adopt.
Yes, of course. Just so by very, very brief background, state law requires that this board adopt at its organizational meeting an annual calendar of meetings. And this year that included a Tuesday, June 25th CIP public hearing date. We've had some scheduling constraints in the interceding time, and we are putting forth now a Wednesday, July 10th proposal. Which is
Thank
before
you
now.
very much. Okay, so I will move adoption of this calendar, revised calendar we have before us on the screens. A second? Yep, Mr. DeFranti has seconded it. Thank you. And I think that's all we need to do. I just need to call for a vote. All in favor of adopting the calendar as revised before us, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, motion passes 4-0, and I think we are good. Mr. Kushner, is there anything else we need to do today?
There are no further items.
All right, thank you. That's it. Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned until next Tuesday. We're going to be back here again, June 4th, for the first of our several CIP work sessions. June 4th, oh, actually, we're not going to be here. We're not going to be here. Is that correct? We're going to be at the CIFEX Education Center with the school board. All right. We're all together, but we're not going to be here. We're going to be with the school board and the superintendent, and we look forward to seeing anybody interested in following us along there. Thank you. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all.